Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unraveling a massive medical detective story centered around metformin. We're going to take some pretty dense, cutting-edge biochemistry and translate it into a really fascinating journey of discovery. Whether you're a pharmacology buff or just curious about how medicine actually works, you're going to see how an ancient remedy evolved into one of the most widely used and, honestly, most misunderstood drugs in all of modern medicine.
So, let's dive right into this central mystery. It's kind of crazy when you think about it, right? We've been prescribing this ubiquitous medication for decades, mostly for type 2 diabetes, yet the scientific community is literally just now figuring out exactly how it reprograms the human body. Unlike modern drugs that get designed in a lab to hit one very specific molecular pathway, metformin was an established, safe therapy way before we even had the tools to understand its molecular mechanisms.
This story definitely doesn't start in a pristine modern lab. Nope, it starts back in medieval Europe, with herbalists using the French lilac plant, which is known scientifically as Galega officinalis. Fast forward to the 1920s, and scientists actually isolated its active compound, galegine, and tested it in humans to lower glucose. The catch? It was way too toxic for medical use. So it wasn't until the 1950s that safer, synthetic derivatives finally made their way into clinical practice.
It is absolutely fascinating to track this chemical evolution from a plant to a synthetic drug. You've got the natural toxic plant compound of galegine, which is an isoprenyl derivative of guanidine. But then, by coupling two molecules of guanidine and adding some very specific substitutions, scientists created the safe, synthetic dimethylbiguanidine. And boom, that is metformin. It's a brilliant example of taking a dangerous natural product and refining it into a literal life-saving tool.
Part 1. The usual suspect, the liver's energy crisis.
For years, the scientific consensus pointed squarely at one usual suspect for how this drug works: the liver. Since metformin is so good at lowering blood sugar, researchers naturally assumed it primarily acted on the liver to stop it from producing so much glucose. And hey, they were completely right. But the way it pulls this off is nothing short of a microscopic energy crisis. To get this, we first need to define a critical piece of cellular machinery called AMPK. Think of AMPK like your body's cellular thermostat. When your cellular energy drops, this thermostat clicks on, forcing your body to stop storing fat and start burning it to restore that energy balance.
The liver's cellular machinery is incredibly dense. But don't worry, there's absolutely no pop quiz on every single pathway here. Just appreciate the sheer complexity of it. Metformin is actively altering the energy dynamics right inside the mitochondria, the power plants of your cells. Instead of getting bogged down in all the acronyms, let's just break down exactly what happens inside those cellular power plants.
Okay, so the crucial takeaway is this simple three-step sequence. First, because it has a positive electrical charge, the drug is literally pulled straight into the cell's power plant. Step 2, once it's in there, it inhibits complex 1 of the respiratory chain. That causes a sudden, sharp drop in ATP, which is basically the cell's primary energy currency. And finally, step 3, that massive energy drop triggers our AMPK thermostat to spring into action and save the cell.
By triggering this sort of cellular panic mode, the liver is forced to halt its energy-intensive processes. Basically, it hits the brakes on pumping out so much glucose into the blood, a process called hepatic gluconeogenesis. Plus, by inhibiting fat synthesis, it clears out lipids in the liver, which makes the organ significantly more sensitive to insulin. It's an incredibly elegant solution. But as recent discoveries have shown us, the liver is really only half the story.
Part 2. The plot twist. The gut takes center stage.
Just when we all thought the case was closed on how metformin works, science uncovered a massive plot twist, pointing away from the liver and straight down into our intestines. This completely flipped our understanding upside down. The old view assumed the liver did all the heavy lifting. But then, researchers ran this fascinating experiment using a delayed-release version of metformin. This version mostly stays trapped in the gut, with very minimal systemic absorption into the blood or liver. And guess what? It still effectively lowered blood glucose. That proved the gut isn't just a passageway, it's an active, primary control center.
It turns out the gut is incredibly busy when it's exposed to this drug. First off, it pulls systemic glucose out of the blood and utilizes it right there in the colon. Second, it stimulates the release of GLP-1, which is a crucial hormone for blood sugar regulation. But here is the most astonishing part. It initiates a gut-brain-liver crosstalk. Through the vagus nerve, the intestines essentially shoot a neural text message to the brain, which then tells the liver to stop producing sugar. How wild is that?
Zooming back out, we can truly appreciate metformin's whole-body impact on metabolism. We've totally moved from a narrow liver-only focus to this dynamic whole-body ecosystem. You can really see how the gut, the liver, the bloodstream, and even immune cells like macrophages are all constantly communicating and responding to the presence of this one single molecule.
Part 3. The unpleasant reality. Solving the side effects.
But this gut plot twist brings us to a rather unpleasant reality. We really can't talk about metformin without addressing why it makes some people feel so incredibly sick. We're talking 20 to 30% of patients experiencing GI side effects, like nausea or diarrhea, which, let's be honest, is a lot of people suddenly rushing to the bathroom. It's actually significant enough that about 5% of all patients have to stop taking the drug entirely because they just can't tolerate it. And for the longest time, doctors had no idea why this happened to some folks and not others.
Well, the answer lies in the sheer volume of the drug that pools in the gut. Plasma concentrations of metformin are actually 30 to 300 times higher in your intestines than in your bloodstream. That is a massive local concentration, and it can potentially overstimulate serotonin release in the gut or reduce serotonin transport, leading directly to those really uncomfortable gastrointestinal symptoms.
But what's truly fascinating here is that your ability to handle this drug might literally be written in your DNA. Studies have now identified genetic culprits for this intolerance. Specific variations in the OCT1 gene, which controls how the drug is transported, or polymorphisms in the SERT gene, which regulates serotonin, can completely dictate your body's reaction. It's a perfect example of why personalized medicine is the future. Your genetics are literally determining your drug tolerance.
Part 4. The future. The fountain of youth?
Let's look out at the horizon for a second and ask a question that has the entire scientific community buzzing. Does this 60-year-old diabetes drug actually hold the secret to anti-aging and human longevity? Well, the longevity connection starts with a complete microbiome makeover. In a major revelation, we now know metformin fundamentally alters the bacterial characters living in our gut ecosystem. It significantly expands populations of Akkermansia, which is a bacteria known to reduce adipose tissue inflammation, while balancing out other species like Escherichia and Intestinobacter. By reshaping this internal ecosystem, the drug actively suppresses systemic inflammation.
And this anti-inflammatory effect is actually measurable right in the blood. Metformin suppresses specific immune markers, things like the neutrophil to lymphocyte ratio and CC11 cytokines, which are essentially biological red flags for aging and tissue dysfunction. By keeping those specific markers suppressed, the drug might actually delay the physical degradation that we normally associate with getting older.
And the rabbit hole goes even deeper. The drug is actively regulating mTOR signaling. If you don't know, the mTOR pathway is basically a master regulator of cellular aging and metabolism. By inhibiting this pathway, studies have shown that metformin can prolong lifespan in organisms ranging all the way from microscopic worms to mice. This humble, ancient diabetes drug is now sitting at the absolute center of human life extension research.
As researchers recently pointed out, we have moved from a simple picture to a much more complex one. For decades, we thought we just had a drug that turned off sugar production in the liver. But the more we study metformin, the more its beautifully complex network of actions is revealed, spanning across our mitochondria, our gut microbiome, our nervous system, and even our core aging pathways.
I'm going to leave you with this final thought to ponder. We started all the way back in medieval Europe with the French lilac plant, and we end up at the absolute cutting edge of anti-aging science. As science continues to peel back the layers of this incredible medical mystery, we really have to wonder, what other miracles are just waiting to be discovered in our oldest medicines? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the science around you.